Now for something completely different. August Stamps and Collectibles capture the surreal humour and anarchic creativity of Monty Python's Flying Circus and the 1975 cult comedy film Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I explored Monty Python's inventive animation, surreal humour and impact on generations of comedy creators and fans with journalist and author Tom Huddlestone.
Tom, when did you first encounter Monty Python?
Well, I think they repeated all 4 series of Monty Python's Flying Circus on the BBC when I would have been about 12 or 13, and I would have taped them all and watched them again and again and again. Graham Chapman's funeral, John Cleese controversially cursing at the pulpit, which is kind of a classic clip. I remember that quite clearly from that age, and I must have seen Holy Grail and Life of Brian around the same time as well. I mean, I may have seen some of it earlier. I certainly remember Mr. Creosote being talked about in the playground when I was, 8, 9, 10. So yeah, but my first clear memory is definitely seeing those Flying Circus episodes being repeated on BBC Two.
But as a young teenager, what drew you to Monty Python then? Because it can be quite complex, subversive, quite obscure for a young teenager. What attracted you to that humour?
Well, I'd been raised on that kind of humour. Me and my mum would listen to The Goon Show and Round the Horn when they were repeated on Radio 4. So we'd actually time our dinner together at 6:30 so that we could listen to something like The Goon Show or Round the Horn. And then I had the tapes of those series, and we used to listen to them on long journeys and stuff. So that kind of wacky humour wasn't all that unusual to me as a kid. And then Monty Python just slotted right into that. And I must have got Monty Python Sings, the album, the LP around the same time, so I knew all the songs. So yeah, I was soaking up Monty Python. I remember when I was at school, I must have been probably 14, we were asked to choose a hero to give a speech to the rest of the class about, and I chose Michael Palin. Okay. So I did sort of a 10-minute speech on the life and career of Michael Palin to my class as my kind of hero at the time.
There is a direct line from The Goon Show through to Monty Python, I think. And Spike Milligan, of course, Q came out about 6 months before Monty Python's Flying Circus. So there was that subversive, obscure, surreal humour had been established. What was so special about Monty Python? Why was it so surprising when it arrived on our screens?
I don't know. I think there's a sweetness to Monty Python that maybe there isn't in Q. Q can be quite, its surrealism is a bit harder edged, as opposed to The Goon Show, which is very kind of funny and quite cosy and tea-timey. Q's quite, or what I've seen of it, I don't know if all of it survives, but what I've seen of it is quite tough. And the David Frost stuff was more kind of political and newsy. And Monty Python is there's bits of violence and there's bits of kind of saucy stuff, but there's a lot of it is just very goofy and absurd and sweet. And I think that people, it's very non-threatening in the best way. I certainly don't use that as a criticism. It's very enjoyable to watch and lovely to watch. And you can, a lot of the people who were watching it were in bands, they were students, they were probably a little, slightly enhanced in some way. So probably watching something that was just goofy and daft was probably just what they wanted right then.
And you talk about the goofiness and the daftness, but actually it was like a combination of intellect and immaturity, wasn't it? Because you had the philosopher's football with Confucius, I think, as the referee. So really kind of complex stuff, but playing out in a lot of slapstick ways. Yeah,
but I mean, I think the Monty Python team would admit that even when they touched on quite highfalutin themes, they didn't really dig into them. When you none of the philosophers espouse their philosophies, they just run up and down the football pitch. And when they do summarised Proust, it's not like they actually go into Proust in any detail. It's just using those kind of names as intellectual markers and goofing on things that people like them, fellow kind of students and intellectuals would find funny.
So they go their separate ways. Cleese leaves earlier, obviously, but they come back after the first film. So Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I think, is the first real film. So what's the story behind it? Do you know why they decided to get back together? And I guess the story of the Holy Grail, which is the miniature sheet stamps for this issue.
Yeah, so I mean, they'd as I'm sure you know, they'd made a film called "And Now for Something Completely Different," which was a compilation of sketches reshot on film, mainly for an American market. It didn't do super well because it felt a bit stiff and a bit forced. It was them revisiting old material. There was no laugh track. It just doesn't quite work. So this was them actually making their own movie on their own terms, and they decided that they were going to direct it themselves, which they'd never directed a movie before. I think they directed bits of And Now for Something Completely Different, but they certainly never directed a whole film. And the idea first came from Terry Jones, who was really into his medieval stuff and his Arthurian history and Arthurian myth. So I think the initial idea was actually to make a film set both in the past and the present. Right. So it would have been King Arthur coming to our time. They apparently wrote a sketch of King Arthur lost in Harrods. But eventually they just decided to, just retell the story of Arthur with as many gags as humanly possible. So Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam directed together, and the kind of idea was that Jones would focus on the people and Gilliam would focus on the technical side, essentially, was the sort of the idea. It didn't completely work. They didn't totally know what they were doing. The weather was miserable. Graham Chapman was suffering from quite severe personal problems and alcoholism. They were just in a situation, the money was extraordinarily tight. I mean, everyone looks at the film now and goes, how clever it is that they use coconuts banging together instead of horses and how funny that is. But the truth is they couldn't afford horses. They didn't have the budget to afford horses. The other famous thing about the film, obviously, is that a large chunk of the money came from musicians. So they basically hit up Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, various other kind of groups who were having a big success at the time. Their managers went, yeah, okay, that sounds like a really good idea. So yeah, and then they must have made their money back many times over, because the film was an enormous success. So yeah, the shoot was very, very difficult. It was very wet. The suits of armour were made out of wool, so they got incredibly wet and soggy, and everyone was miserable. And then when they got the film back into the editing suite, none of it worked. They hated it, they cut it, they recut it. I think they did like 14 different edits and hated it. And Neil Innes, who was a long-time Python collaborator, he was in the Bonzo Dog Doodah band, but he also wrote a lot of music with the Pythons. He wrote like a medieval type score for it, which you can occasionally hear little bits of coming in and out. And it just didn't work. The film wasn't funny with that music on it. And so eventually they ended up using essentially library music, so that sort of music that had been written for BBC drama shows that was very pompous and epic and over the top, and they just cut that in and it made it 10 times funnier. And from there they kind of recut, and it just started to get funnier and funnier and funnier. And even at the end, like John Cleese, for the rest of, probably still says that he hates the ending. That it ends just with a hard cut at the end. So yeah, I think even then they weren't happy with it. But once it got out into the world, people just absolutely adored it.
And it shows that Monty Python were, in a way, comedy rock stars, because you talk about the bands that got involved and helped finance it. You think about George Harrison with Handmade Films. Neil Innes worked, of course, with Eric Idle on The Ruttles, which I think is a great kind of film by a Python. 50 years on them from its first release, why are we still quoting it, Tom? What is it about that film?
I think it's two reasons. One, it's spectacularly funny. The jokes just really work. They're literally timeless, because it's set in the medieval period, and there's no Obviously it's silly and ridiculous, but there's none of the jokes are of their time. There are no references to whoever was in, power at the time. There's references to kind of hippie communes and things like that, which maybe have slightly dated, but are still very, very funny. But overall, none of the jokes have dated, and it's still super funny. And the other reason why I personally go back to it and love to see it, I watched it on the big screen at the BFI South Bank a few years ago, is just how beautiful it is. Mm-hmm. It really is it's comparable to John Borman's Excalibur, which was made, 10 years later. It has that kind of English fog and light coming through the mist and these beautiful landscapes, and it just I think it's the best looking comedy film ever made.
We're talking because you're one of the expert editorial contributors to Royal Mail Stamps and Collectibles, and for the Monty Python collection, you've written the presentation pack. I wonder how you approach these projects.
Yeah, I'm approached by Royal Mail and asked if I'd like to work on a project, to which I almost invariably say yes, because they're always really good fun. Yes, I'm always given a brief, and this will sit on this page and this will sit on that page, but I can also suggest my own ideas. Certainly have done that in the past, so. There is certainly, you're always aware that the rights holders of any property are going to be reading it. So it's not a work of criticism; it's a work of celebration. Yeah. And that's certainly how I kind of go into it. It helps that I'm always writing about something that I really like, so I'm really happy to celebrate it in any way that I can. That the one time I got feedback was working on the Blackadder stamps, and we got feedback that Richard Curtis really liked the copy and really liked my writing. So, and that was a really, really lovely thing to hear. So, if they don't like it, we rewrite it. Yeah. So, which is fine too.
But is it an exercise in stretching your tone of voice as well? Because writing, for instance, Sherlock or Warhammer or Star Wars, which you've worked on the stamp collections for those, and writing Monty Python, different tones of voice, perhaps different audiences, so it keeps you fresh in terms of understanding your audience and also the tone and personality of the characters you're writing about.
Yeah, doing a job like working at Time Out on the film desk, which I did for a long time, you get used to addressing yourself to different readers and different audiences. So I would write everything from quite serious interviews with very serious, art house filmmakers, to daft list pieces on, the best movies with hats and the best, instances in a film where someone's head explodes, or, the silliest dogs in movies, or, so there'd be a huge spread of tones of voice and readerships targeted. I guess it comes back to that. So yes, with Star Wars, you're sort of enthusiastic and nerdy, and with Sherlock, that was slightly more serious, maybe in tone. And then for Blackadder and Monty Python, it was trying to, without coming off as attempting to outshine the material that you already have, but to throw a couple, to write in quite a light-hearted way. So, one of the pieces that I wrote for the Monty Python starts off with, on such and such a date, I think it's July 20th, whenever it was, 1969, man first landed on the moon. 2 weeks later, something even more extraordinary happened. So it's about putting in a joke that isn't, it's not going to blow anyone's minds as a joke, but just something that's quite readable and will make you smile a little bit and know that you're kind of going into something quite light and funny. Yeah.
Going from talking about tone of voice and different audiences, going from the ridiculous to sublime with your beautiful new book launched last week about David Lynch, his work and world. I wonder, is there a connection there? Are there parallels between Monty Python, who really pioneered a new type of comedy, and Lynch, who really kind of established a new genre for TV, what we'd call prestige TV, I think. So in a way, they're both pioneers, even in totally different realms.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, they were both people who, for whatever reason, were completely unafraid to do something that hadn't been done before. and went at it full bore and full throttle, whether or not there was a risk of driving straight into a wall. I also think that, I don't know if Lynch was a Python fan, but it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. There is absurdist humour in everything that he ever did, from Eraserhead onwards. Having grown up on Python probably opened my mind to the surrealism of Lynch. I was probably better prepared for that sort of thing as quite a young kid because I'd watched Monty Python.
They both live in that small space between subversive, obscure, absurd, and mainstream.
Yeah,
And that's a really
absolutely. Yeah.
It
Really is. Yeah, and they do absolutely. They both balance themselves quite perfectly on that point. Yeah.
So your beautiful book on David Lynch. You've worked with Lucasfilm. You've written Star Wars books, Warhammer books, children's fiction. A lot of stuff out there in the world. What still draws you back into the world of stamps and Royal Mail?
Well, I mean, on one level, it's just really good fun. It's really good fun to write copy about stuff that I enjoy. They always, getting paid to write about Star Wars and Star Trek and Blackadder and Sherlock and all of these things that I adore. Porridge, that was a really, really good fun one. Getting to, it's a series that I absolutely adore, and couldn't, in what other context would I get the opportunity to write about Porridge? I'm not going to sit down and write a whole book about it. So, it was really good fun. But also, I'm a collector of things. I'm a collector of records. I'm a collector of books. And when I was a kid, I had my stamp collecting time. My dad lived in the Seychelles for a long time. He taught maths over there, and I used to go out twice a year and visit him with my sister. And the stamps they had over there were beautiful. A lot of them had kind of wildlife and birds on, which at the age of, what would I have been, 8, 9, 10, 11, that was what I was really into. So they'd have, beautiful stamps with giant tortoises and, various seabirds and all this kind of stuff. So I collected those, and, so I completely understand the passion, for sure. Yeah. I feel really comfortable writing for Royal Mail. It's always something that I want to do and that I enjoy doing. So I always really look forward to those emails, for sure.
Tom, you've worked on a variety of themes for Royal Mail, from Star Wars to Aardman animation. Is there a theme, a subject you'd like to tackle for Royal Mail that you'd like to see on a set of stamps?
Well, I know that they do music stamps. I loved the David Bowie ones. I would have loved to have worked on those. I would love to see, I think it's probably too obscure. I would love to see a set of kind of post-punk stamps. How about that? I would work on those. How about, The Cure on a stamp? I'd like to see that. I'd like to see Gang of Four on a stamp. I'd like to see Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark on a stamp. Yeah. I think that would be really good fun. Let's have weird early 80s indie post-punk
XTC
stamp.
Explode.
Yeah. Let's have that stamp set. I'd certainly like to work on that. That'd be fun.
And thanks to Tom for putting up with my Spanish Inquisition. Alongside the stamps, miniature sheet and presentation pack, you'll find limited edition medal covers and a stunning gold miniature sheet. It's all at royalmail.com/Monty Python.